Welcome to Lithium-ion Rock, Season 1, Episode 15, Part 3, with Luke Kissam, recorded on May 30th. ALB, Lithium King, and Charlotte, the Queen City of the South. Kings Mountain, American Girl. We recorded this interview with Luke in his Charlotte, North Carolina headquarters on the 9th floor, overlooking Kings Mountain and Bessemer City. What do you think? The Kings Mountain was one of my questions. From the work that you've done, what size is that, do you think, in terms of, at your investor day a couple of years ago, I think I had met John Mitchell at the time, and he said, Albemarle's philosophy is 20,000 tons for 20 years. That's kind of like the minimum threshold of an opportunity.
It's well above that.
It's well above that.
It's well above that.
And the whole area in North Carolina, I mean, it's not just Kings Mountain, that is more material throughout the belt.
The 10 belt is what they call it. And those were the original resources that were used for lithium in the Americas. And when the assets became available, the resources became available in Argentina and in Chile, that's when those assets at Bessemer City and Kings Mountain were put on hold because of the cost position. And it was a smaller business. It was all about cost.
Different world.
Different now. Much different world today. So we are actively studying. We've got people engaged on it full time. And it's just a matter of what are the permits, what are the costs, what are the roadblocks, what are the decision points that we have to, what's that process look like over time. But I fully expect in my lifetime that they will be operating a lithium production facility in Kings Mountain.
It's hard for me to believe, given the trajectory of demand growth, and you're seeing SK Innovation, coming with a battery plant, and there'll be more cathode here, that I've written about this, just the plain vanilla spodumene that's similar to what's in Western Australia and all the history with the metallurgy. It just, like, how could this area not become part of the future supply chain?
There's no question it will. The one difference that you have that we have to be concerned about is in Western Australia. I mean, it's a great place. It's a great place for mining. It's a wonderful place to produce lithium, but there's not a lot of stuff around there. I mean, the joint venture with MRL will be a fly in, fly out at that mine and at that site. We're on I-85 here at the 10 Belt, not far from Charlotte, and the town's kind of growing around it. It is a different dynamic there, which requires a different thought process, different permits, and different operating parameters. So that's really what the difference is, to be perfectly honest with you. That asset in Kings Mountain is a world-scale asset at world-scale concentrations, and it will compete with any spodumene rock in the world.
That's great. It's my understanding, and the costs of labor and energy and all sorts of infrastructure here. I've been to the Pilbara, and a question on Wodgina, and it's not a natural location in the Pilbara to build a downstream plant. I mean,
right.
The population is 15,000.
Right.
So I was curious how, I think I asked David Ryan this, that like you could theoretically ship to Kemerton right from the Pilbara, yep. But I don't think that's the plan. No. Where do you see Wodgina sitting on the cost curve, both for hydroxide as well as spodumene? You indicated you wouldn't sell that spodumene unless you could earn your 40% margin. If I'm doing the math, I think the $400 cost of spodumene, you would probably need $650, $700 spodumene prices before that was economic. So just on those two questions of cost, what do you think?
If I look at the development out there, my expectation is that we will build a conversion asset at Wodgina, and it'll be a fly in, fly out, just like they operate the mine today. And the camps there, so MRL will continue to operate that camp, soon to operate the crusher, the concentrator, and we'll have a hydroxide plant there. I also think we're going to look at areas in the future that China's an obvious choice because the capital intensity would be less there. I think on the cost curve, Wodgina won't be Talison, but it'll compete with everything else from a rock standpoint. So I think we'll be absent Talison on the low end of that cost curve. And when you blend, the Albemarle rate will be Albemarle a bit below in the cost curve from rock to hydroxide.
Do you have a particular view on how the US can secure a battery supply chain for future EV adoption?
Yeah, they can assist Albemarle. No, look, I think you got to go where the resources are. And if you're going to follow the top tier resources in the world today, those resources are in Chile, those resources are in Argentina. There's a potential for those resources in Bolivia, in the triangle down there. And then you got Western Australia, you got the best quality rock in the world. There in North Carolina, and I'm looking out a window here at Kings Mountain and towards Bessemer City, those are world-class resources. And it's just a matter of, from a capital perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from a community perspective, are we going to be able to effectively and efficiently bring that to the market in the next decade? Are we going to need to look at resources further in Western Australia, expand further in Chile, or in other areas of Latin America? So to us, you got to follow the resource. And with brine, you're not going to ship brine halfway across the world because it's water. You're just shipping water. So you're going to produce the lithium hydroxide and lithium carbonate there. If you look at the battery manufacturers today, there's only one or two smaller battery manufacturers in the United States. So there's going to have to be a conscious decision made from a government standpoint, to incentivize the capital investment that will be necessary to compete with a brownfield expansion in Asia. I mean, it's just dollars and cents. There's going to have to be some incentive to be able to drive that supply chain in North America.
Are you talking about incentive for the mining or incentive for cathode and battery plants?
I'm talking about both. Now, it's easier to ship lithium hydroxide around the world, right? It's a powder. It's easier to ship lithium carbonate around the world, or lithium metal. But those batteries, and that's where the resource is, but those battery producers can build a plant pretty much anywhere they can get the raw materials that they need, right? They're always going to be faced in building in the U.S. It's going to be a greenfield site. So it's got to be a brand new site versus expanding existing sites in Asia, which is usually less expensive from a capital intensity standpoint because you've already got the basic infrastructure there that you may not have on a greenfield site. So I think the government is looking at it. I think local governments need to be engaged as well. And if we want to have a U.S. supply chain for lithium batteries that are solely from a North America standpoint, there needs to be some infrastructure, there needs to be some coordination, and there needs to be some incentives made to bring in that entire supply chain.
And that is consistent with what's happening in Europe, and we've seen that.
Absolutely, and it's certainly what's happening in China. China is being aggressive in finding ways to get the offtakes for the raw materials, and there's certain incentives that the government has in place to encourage the battery production within China. If you produce lithium carbonate or lithium hydroxide within China today and export it outside of China, there's a 13% non-recoverable VAT, essentially a 13% tax on any exports of hydroxide or carbonate outside of China. Now, other products are similar to that encourages from a cost perspective, if you're a cathode producer or a battery producer and the capital is lower to build in China, you've got an incentive at lower lithium costs because you don't have to pay that tax. It makes sense if they do the same with other raw materials and you can get the quality labor that you need and the technology, which they certainly have.
You're following, where your customers are. So if your customers are in Asia, you're developing assets near there. But do you see a role, or as an American company, as an American, championing kind of U.S. battery cathode investments, and then Albemarle being, a strategically important raw material supplier to, say, GM, Ford, VW, USA, et cetera?
Yeah, boy, that's tough when you run a global business because you got to go where your customers are. And if you look, 50% of all the EVs today are in China. A bigger, maybe 25% Europe, and then 15% U.S. and the rest of the world. Dave, is that about right?
Yes.
So you can't ignore China. not and be in the business that we're in. You can't ignore Europe and be in the business we're in. That's 75% of the market. So we've got to go to where our customers are. So I have faith in the American ingenuity of a way to figure out how to do it, but we need to get busy doing it, okay? And we need to get busy. We need to quit talking about it. We need to do it.
That sounds great. Luke, thank you. Rodney, do you have any other questions?
No, this is great.
Okay, great. So now we're going to focus on getting some cool pictures that we can, put as part of this cover art. And
hey, Rodney, nice talk to you. Okay, dude.
Absolutely, that was great. Thanks very much for making the time.
Okay, it's June 11th. Welcome to Lithium-ion Rocks. We are here in Santiago, finalizing the third segment with Albemarle, and we have a very special guest whose name I'm going to let her pronounce. But the first name is Ellen.
Howard, I think you can do the rest. Go for
it. Ellen Lenny Pessagno.
Excellent.
All right. So Perfect. The country manager for Albemarle, who was appointed some 9 months ago. And before we go into it, Ellen has a background as a diplomat, largely focused on promoting U.S. exports and free trade as a diplomat in the Foreign Service at the U.S. Department of Commerce, and has been posted in various countries, including Chile the last 7 years, but also, I believe, in Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, as well.
And Spain.
Okay. So what, I guess, made you become a diplomat and spend your whole career there? And also, how did you become aware of the Albemarle position, and what attracted you to leave your role in government service for Albemarle?
Okay. Lots of questions. So I love languages and was very interested in international business, and discovered that a good way to get great experience was joining the International Trade Administration. And my plan was to go back to the private sector after a couple of years of learning all that needed to be learned. And in the meantime, I found out about the Commerce Department's Foreign Service, and I realized immediately that was for me. Took the exam and went off for my first assignment to Argentina, and was there at a really exciting time, 1997 to 2002. At the time, Argentina was the darling, one of the great growing markets, and then I was also there for their economic meltdown, which was very tragic in terms of its toll on people, but was also, I have to admit, very interesting from an international business perspective and from an economics perspective to see how when people don't know where the economy's going, when they don't know what will happen to their currency, how everything stops. That was my first assignment, and as you mentioned, Howard, I've had all Spanish-speaking assignments, and loved what I did, helping U.S. companies export, as well as helping U.S. companies invest in the market I was in. And I worked across the broad range of sectors except for agriculture, because there's a separate service that works on that. I woke up every morning excited about creating jobs in the U.S., and I did that for 26 years. While I was posted in in Chile, Albemarle Rockwood, and then Albemarle was a company that I worked with as they were looking at how they could increase their extraction rate. And so I worked very closely with them, had the opportunity to work with the team here, to work with the leadership team, including Luke from Charlotte, and also brief the board when they visited Chile. So I liked the company. I liked the mission. I couldn't move from waking up every morning and creating jobs in the U.S. to selling software. So, the idea of working with a company whose mission is to help reduce global warming. And, I mentioned in my presentation today here at the Lithium Conference that the indigenous people feel very strongly connected to the solar. They inherited it from their grandparents. and they want to also leave a sustainable solar to their grandchildren. That's my vision for what I do, is I want to leave a sustainable world for my grandchildren. And so, I wake up really every morning enthused about helping Albemarle provide the lithium that's going to help move the world in a sustainable way. When I found out about the opportunity in Albemarle, it was a given that, it was time for me to make a change. I had really wasn't learning anything anymore, and it was really a no-brainer for me. Big change to move from the government to the private sector, but haven't regretted it once. I'm really, really pleased to be part of this amazing team here in Albemarle.
Well, as we've observed, there are diplomatic considerations in any emerging market country. I guess, what is Albemarle's ongoing collaboration with the Chilean government?
We have a contract with Albemarle that forms the basis of our ability to extract lithium. Our predecessor company started the lithium industry in Chile 39 years ago, and we did that with a joint venture with Albemarle, in fact. So we've got a long...
With Albemarle, Rockwood...
with Corfo. With Corfo. Currently, we've got a great relationship with Corfo. There's a lot of aspects of our contract that need to be checked on frequently. For example, our sales invoices. So we've got a team from Albemarle that comes over frequently. But we also stay very close to Corfo to let them know what's going on with our production. Our commission to the Chilean state is an important one, and so we like them to be aware of what we're doing so that they can also understand what impact that will have in terms of the revenues coming into the Chilean government. As part of our contract, we've committed to $300 million in R&D, and Corfo has the sole authority to determine what to do with those funding. And so 2 weeks ago, they announced a bid for consortium to work on on circular economy themes, as well as possibly build a recycling facility in the north of Chile. While I couldn't be at the announcement, someone from Albemarle was there, and they asked me to provide a video for that launch. So we're working very closely together. As you know, collaboration always leads to better results. And so we're really pleased that we have a very strong relationship with Corfo.
That's great. I don't know if this is being picked up by the recording, but we're here adjacent to where the Tangshi cocktail hour is going to be, and it is lithium-ion rock, so if there's some background music here, we're going to have to put up with it. How do you see, what is the situation in the Salar de Atacama today?
We consider our operation to be very sustainable, and it's something that a lot of companies are looking at now. The government is continually monitoring the sustainability of the Salar as well. And when we received our new environmental permit in 2016, it was based on a whole host of requirements that would allow us to show to the Chilean government that our operation is sustainable. So just to give you a few examples, we have 150 monitoring wells within the Salar, many of which are in indigenous lands. And we monitor those either biweekly or monthly, depending on the requirement. And I think very interestingly, there's a team of the indigenous community. They actually have their own environmental committee. And every time we go out and monitor a well, they accompany us. So they're learning how the process works. We've provided training on environmental issues within the Salar, but they're also verifying that the information that we're providing is correct. So that's one example. I think another key thing for listeners to be aware of is that we have an early warning plan established with the government. So as we look at these thresholds, as we go out and monitor the environmental health of the Salar, we have a plan in place such that if the thresholds go beneath a certain level, we would actually have to reduce our pumping. And all of this is clearly laid out environmental plan with the government. So what does that mean? That means if we were to have a temporary impact on the Salar, we would have to reduce our pump rates. And over time, if the thresholds were to rise again, then there would be a mechanism to go back to the original pump rate. It's all put in place in order to ensure the sustainability of the Salar, because that is our commitment, not only to the indigenous people in the Salar, so that they can ensure that their grandchildren are inheriting a sustainable Salar, but also it's our commitment to the Chilean people.
I noticed in your presentation something like 80% of the employees are indigenous people. which I thought was a very large number compared to the fly-in, fly-out.
Yeah, so that's not exactly right. So 80% of our Albemarle employees here in Chile are from the Antofagasta region, which is really important. Because traditionally mining companies will have more people flying in and flying out. They're up at 4,000 meters, and people work maybe 7 days a week, 7 days straight, and then they go home. We've got the facility in La Negra, which allows us to have fully employ people in Antofagasta, and in the Salar. 30% of the people who work in the Salar are from the local indigenous communities, and we're really proud of that. And not only is it a good number, you have to remember that we've been operating there for 39 years, and so we have second generations that are working with us. So it's a family.
What steps is Albemarle taking to improve the conditions in the area?
In addition to all the monitoring that we do that I mentioned, we've embarked on a new project that's going to allow us to produce more lithium while maintaining the same extraction rate. And that's really critical. The Minister of Mining this morning in the lithium conference was one of his asks, is that companies need to continually innovate, continually improve their processes. And so that's exactly where we are. We currently have the highest efficiency rate in the Salar, and we're looking to even up that even more. Additionally, we have a team that looks at innovations, that's working with companies from all over the world in order to continually improve our processes. And really, each facility is very different. The brine is different. So our neighbor's brine is different from our brine, and our brine is different depending on where we pump it from, and depending on, it also evolves over time. So it really is a very complex operation, and it's one that has a lot of value add. A lot of professional people are supporting engineers, environmental specialists, geologists, hydrogeologists, are all working with us in this very high value add process that we have here in Chile.
The 30% that you talked about, I think in your presentation, you said about $100 million. Another analyst kind of commented that was the number. Is that right?
So as part of our contract with Corfo, we pay commissions on our sales of our final price to our clients. And if you look at April 1 of last year to March 31 of 2019, we've paid over $100 million in commissions to Corfo.
Okay. I was talking about what Luke described was a thermal evaporator. I thought it was in your presentation that it cost $100 million, but maybe that was you were talking about what you were just talking about.
Yeah, to echo what Luke mentioned, we have installed a thermal evaporator in the new plant, and it will not only reduce water usage in the new plant, it will also reduce water usage in plant 1 and 2. So yet another good example of our sustainability.
And the 30% increase, I think that's off of about a 50%.
Yes.
And so that's like to 65%.
Absolutely.
Is the expectation.
Absolutely.
And it's not 50 to 80. That was just one question that I had. Okay.
Yeah.
The difference between brine and water.
So, there's been, as I mentioned, a lot of focus on the sustainability of the Salar, and I think sometimes reports, journalists are confused about the different resources. We extract brine in order to produce lithium. Our extraction rate allowed is 442 liters per second. We have water, so the brine, it's important to note that it can't be used for anything else, right? It can't be used for drinking water, and it can't be used for agriculture. We do have 21 liters per second of water rights to use in our processes, and we only use 6 liters per second. There's mining companies that are extracting water from the basin that have an impact, but our impact is on brine, and it's something that doesn't have another application.
Is it necessary to have coordinated management in the Salar de Atacama?
We do think it would be helpful. There's four companies, 2 that are extracting brine and 2 that are extracting water. Of course, we believe it would be very helpful to work together. We're hoping to get to that level, to be able to sit down and collaborate and all pull in the same direction to ensure the sustainability of the Salar.
Okay, and this is one question here that I wasn't aware of an issue, but you brought it to my attention or consideration that you wanted to talk about, the relationship with the Council of the Atacameños peoples.
Well, as you know, Howard, and when you're extracting natural resources, having a strong relationship with the local community is critical. As we began to look to increasing our extraction rate, the first thing that we did was meet with the local community. We started with the community of Pessagno, which is the indigenous community that's closest to our facility. It's 27 kilometers away. We had a long relationship with them, signed an agreement with them in 2012 that basically lays out the framework in which we'll work together. We provide financial contributions in order for them to provide better education and some important infrastructure aspects. And from there, the indigenous communities around the Salar, there's 18 of them, became interested in working with us as well. And the community of Pessagno in solidarity also asked us to work with the larger indigenous community. So this council is really interesting because it's the only one of its kind in Chile that represents the same indigenous ethnicity. And they're actually the official body that works with municipality, that works with the central government on issues that affect them. And so we began a dialogue with them. They were very interested in ensuring the sustainability of the Salar and ensuring that they could continue to support their traditions. And we, of course, were interested in the same, as well as being able to continue to produce lithium in the Salar through 2043. So we signed an agreement with them. It's the only of its kind in Chile. And we share 3.5% of our sales with the indigenous community on an annual basis. And what they do is each community, through a unanimous process within their assembly, develop projects based on their development plans. We fund those projects, and at the end of the year, a third-party auditor does an audit to ensure that the money has been used in the appropriate way. We've done this for 3 years with the council and haven't had any problems, and we've got, another 25 years to go, I guess, through 2043, 24 years to go. We're really proud of this relationship that we've developed with them, but I think the most important thing about this agreement is that 3/4 of this agreement is based on the sustainability of the Salar. As I mentioned earlier, they've developed their own environmental committee. We're required to provide 4 trainings a year in the environment and the sustainability of the Salar. We actually did 8 this year. It's a great relationship. And another interesting piece of our agreement is that the council was interested in having their own monitoring wells. And so through our agreement, we'll pay for the installation of those wells, and then they're going to be responsible for monitoring them, sharing the appropriate information. The agreement we have is one of a kind, and it was voluntary, was not a requirement from Corfo or any other government agency in order to continue operating here.
What was their biggest concern?
From the indigenous community?
Yes.
Really the sustainability. And as such, when we designed the agreement, that's why so much of it is focused on environmental impact, on the thresholds in the Salar, et cetera.
And then last year, the CCHEN rejected Albemarle's request to increase the lithium sales quota in the Salar. Will you insist on that?
Following the rejection, we analyzed our numbers again, and in reality, based on our projections for our production, we actually have enough sales quota to get us through 2043, which is the lifetime of our contract here. And so we will not be insisting with CCHEN on the approval of the additional sales quota.
Okay, and do you already have the technology that increases the efficiency and allows you to achieve that goal?
We do. We've been looking at very innovative processes, and we've got one that we firmly believe in, and we're already underway in developing that project.
And if my understanding is correct, that's sort of late 2021, I think, the start?
Yeah, about that.
And after last year's disagreements with Corfo over the preferential price, do you consider that Chile provides a favorable scenario for the development of the industry?
Yes, we absolutely continue to believe that Chile has favorable. It would be a good place for other companies to invest. As you've seen, we're continuing to invest heavily here in Chile. The undersecretary who was at the conferences this afternoon talked about some new regulations they'll be putting in place in order to attract further lithium investment, and we'll be very interested to see what those parameters look like.
So, you mentioned it. So how much has Albemarle invested, and in which areas, which projects?
So we're in the process of investing almost $1 billion. I already mentioned the Solar Yield project, and then, of course, we're in the process of finishing Plant 3, which is going to allow us to more than duplicate our production and get up to about 85,000 metric tons per year.
And just to remind the listeners, what's the timeline roughly on that?
So we're looking at the end of 2020 for completing the project, and then full commissioning at the beginning of 2021.
And that's for La Negra 3?
That's La Negra 3.
And are you studying any new projects in Chile?
We've really got our hands full right now. Doubling production is a challenging one, and I'd say at this point, it's really where our full focus is.
Okay, great.
Maybe one or two more questions on my end. You mentioned your history in Argentina before it was bad, and then when it was bad, and it kind of went good with Macri. There was all this hope and optimism, and a lot of investment kind of came, in particular in the lithium space. You also mentioned another thing I was thinking is that there wasn't much mining, in what you did there. And I actually analyzed just a couple of days ago that Chile, a much smaller country, 17 million versus 44 million in Argentina. But if you look at the nature of the exports, it's mostly, agriculture, soybeans and the like. And there's not as much mining activity, which means there's less mining infrastructure in Argentina compared to Chile. But how do you assess what's happening in Argentina? We have an election in October.
Yeah.
Inflation's very high, debt is high. They got bailed out by the IMF again. So there's a lot of political uncertainty. I don't know what the polls are, but Christina kind of coming back. Just could you give us a sense of how this may play out and what that kind of could mean, risk reward wise or sovereign risk perspective, for anyone. Again, Lithium-ion rocks is focused on people investing in the lithium space, and a lot of people are thinking about where they should put their money, and Argentina is has become more risky in the past 18 months.
Yeah, so excellent question. And I would like to point out I was in the Salar de Hombre Muerto, I think in 2000, when lithium wasn't a big deal. But I remember the time thinking what a beautiful and exotic place it was, and looking at these blue pools was pretty fascinating to me. And I never expected that I would be working for a lithium company 19 years later. So. But back to Argentina, it is a country that history has shown goes up and goes down, and certainly businesses that have an ability to move quickly in and out or to reduce exposure can do well in a market like that. Clearly, investing in the lithium space is very different, and one is looking at a much longer-term outlook. If you're asking to choose between Chile and Argentina, I do think that our experience here in Chile speaks volumes about the stability here, and Chile is certainly known for its strong institutions, clear rules and regulations. And when you look at presidential elections, while we see flip-flopping between the more conservatives and the more socialists, you don't see huge shifts in terms of economic policy, which in terms of making a long-term investment certainly reduces the risk. Argentina, as you pointed out, has another election coming up. Depending on who wins, the outcome could be quite different. That said, I do think that there are certainly industries that have been able to have long-term success in Argentina, so it's not impossible. And you do need to remember that a lot of the mining policy is made at the provincial level in Argentina. Clearly, a presidential election will have an impact on that, but it's not the only game in town.
I've been told, just because we looked at Argentina well before lithium was popular, and they said the province matters, right?
Yeah.
The provincial law. Okay, that's great. I have, thousands more questions which we could ask, and hopefully we can do this again sometime in a few months or later this year or whatever. But thank you so much. It was great meeting you, Ellen, and very, enthusiastic, as a compliment to our interview with Luke to round this out in part 3 on the Albemarle Lithium-ion Rocks podcast.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Rodney. I appreciate it.
Some discussion, the narrative out there about Albemarle is often very negative. de-worsification, the worst deal in mineral resources. I have had a much different view, and I like what I heard from Luke, on this podcast, and also exceptionally impressed with Lenny Pessagno, who, when she mentioned her first 7 years living in Argentina, reminded me of, another woman in lithium. For those genuinely interested in a healthy lithium market, I think we need to see a healthy Albemarle and a healthy stock performance for Albemarle and leadership that would then attract investment across the sectors. So to all those guys and girls, who call Albemarle a bad company, I referenced in that Southern Accents, Lithium Bull, another song from my favorite Tom Petty. In Lithium-ion Rocks, Lithium-ion Bull, and through our respective LinkedIn and Twitter posts, Rodney and I may share with our audience some rationale for a stock for which we have conviction, to own or not to own. If you agree or disagree with and act on or against the rationale of anything said or written in this or any other Lithium-ion Rocks or Lithium-ion Bull, that's your free choice. But to be clear, what you are listening to or reading is not investment advice and may not be unbiased. It should not be construed as an investment recommendation to buy or sell any security. Rodney and I are not registered investment advisors nor broker-dealers. Please visit libull.com for further disclaimers.